I found that when I started to compare the photographs of the two ships up until April 1st of 1912, that the Olympic surprisingly was starting to look more and more like Titanic. What should be a case against a switch, we find that the pictures actually start to promote it after a while.
For Bruce, the most dramatic example was the portholes. The Titanic had a distinctive 5-porthole arrangement on the forecastle deck. This feature was missing on the Olympic at the time of its launch. But then, at some point in the winter of 1911, it was suddenly changed to exactly the same pattern as the Titanic.
The reason for this we don't know. But for some reason the Olympic started to look more and more like Titanic. But should be evidence to disprove a switch theory, in fact, supports it.
The sisters were becoming twins. By the spring of 1912, the two ships were almost a perfect mirror image. The plan was primed and ready to go. In March, the Olympic was brought into the dry dock in Belfast to have a propeller blade replaced. It was a job that should have taken 2 days, but the Olympic was here for 1 week. It was at this point that many believe the switch was made.
There was only one dry dock that could handle ships of this size. They were racing to complete the Titanic. Only one dry dock. The ships were changing places, perhaps on a daily basis for about 4 days, March the 2nd onwards. And that's it. That was your opportunity.
The switch would have been very simple and very quick. What needs to be changed? A few lifeboats, a few lifebelts, a few letterheads and menus?
Basically trivial stuff. And White Star actually made a practice of making all their portable items interchangeable ship to ship.
Both ships used exactly the same stuff, and the crest on all this was not the name of the individual ship, it was the White Star Line. So that was taken care of.
When the rest of the workforce comes back into work on Monday morning, it's like nothing's happened.
If true, it was the greatest sleight of hand in history. On March the 7th, the ship White Star called the Olympic sailed out of Belfast. 3 weeks later, the ship they called the Titanic was ready for its maiden voyage. But White Star had one last hurdle to overcome: Titanic's official sea trials.
Normally these things had 2 days of sea trials, 2 full days of sea trials. Titanic only got the benefit of one short day, was never run up to full speed or put through any serious manoeuvres at all.
The trials were so superficial, the inspectors failed to notice one fact in particular. The Titanic was on fire, just as Paddy the Pig had said.
It is an established fact that there had been a coal bunker fire burning. It'd been burning from the time the ship actually left Belfast.
I mean, that wasn't known back in the 60s, well, not widely known. It was only people like, people like me that dig into these things all the time.
Quite extraordinary, this. You can't help being amazed by the slapdash nature of some of the things that went on.
There's one thing that sailors fear more than anything else at sea, more than icebergs, more than sea monsters: it's a fire.
But of course, as far as the inspectors were concerned, they were looking at a brand new ship, and they weren't bothered to look too closely.
They've seen the plans, they know the thing works, it's exactly the same build as the Olympics, so we can sign it off at 12 o'clock and all go for an early lunch. The inspector didn't even go down to the engine room to have a look.
White Star had got away with it. With their certificate of seaworthiness in their pocket, and with the fire merrily raging in the bunker, they took the Titanic down to Southampton. But there, further troubles awaited them. The crew signed on in Belfast seemed to have taken a dislike to the new ship.
We know that the crew that brought the ship down from Belfast, only one of those men actually signed back on.
The boilermen and stokers resigned en masse. A bunker fire was bad enough, but was there something else about the ship which worried them?
As the first crew to actually work the ship, they would have noticed almost immediately that the coal bunkers, the furnaces on on the boilers were not new. They didn't want to know about this ship.
Perhaps Paddy the Pig was right when he said there were rumours amongst the crew of a switch. Their decision not to sign back on is all the more surprising, given that Britain was in the grip of a national coal strike.
Literally thousands of seamen were out of a job because of a coal strike. Ships were just laid idle. There was no coal to get them to sea. Thousands of sailors are without work, and yet these men choose to throw themselves out of a job.
And the greasers down below were not the only ones reluctant to board the Titanic on its maiden voyage.
If you look at the records, 55, mainly first-class passengers, have also cancelled their voyage.
The strangest cancellation of all was the ship's owner, the financier J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan, he had promised publicly to go on the maiden voyage, but he cancelled at the last minute on grounds of ill health. And shortly afterwards, the New York Times reporter ran him to earth in the south of France, where he was extremely healthily diverting himself with his mistress.
When Titanic finally set sail from Southampton on April the 10th, it's a little known fact that she was just 2/3 full. The plan, it's argued, was to scuttle her in mid-Atlantic, but the company had one minor problem. She was full of people. The captain, E.J. Smith, would need to be in on the plot, and there were various White Star officials on board, including the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews. They'd need a rescue vessel. Enter Stanley Lord, captain of the passenger cargo ship Californian.
The whole of Californian's performance makes me think that she was a major part of the plan to get the people off Titanic before sinking it.
The Californian was also owned by J.P. Morgan. Until a few days before, it had been stuck in the port of London because of the coal strike.
Suddenly, mysteriously, there's enough coal for Californian. And the orders to sail are obviously sail ASAP, as soon as you possibly can, because you've got to get somewhere.
Her sudden departure was all the more mysterious because she was virtually empty.
Captain Lord has taken the Californian into the mid-Atlantic with no passengers and no cargo, except for 3,000 woolen sweaters and blankets. Exactly what you'd need if you were going to turn your ship into a glorified lifeboat.
The Californian sailed at full speed across the Atlantic before suddenly coming to a halt on the evening of April 14th.
Captain Lord orders Californian stopped. Why rush halfway across the Atlantic just to stop?
Was the Californian keeping a rendezvous? She'd received ice warnings, but no other ship in the North Atlantic felt obliged to stop that night. Certainly not the Titanic, which at that very moment was careering at full speed towards almost exactly the same point.
Captain Smith had ice warnings for most of the day. He was well aware that there was ice ahead. He never slowed down. He didn't put extra lookouts at the head of the ship. He only had them in the crow's nest. But this was business as usual. Time is money on these ships.